Fear of losing money in trading. Why "don't worry" is the most dangerous advice. You feel the knot in your stomach and someone tells you not to worry. Cute. The market does not care about your calm breathing exercises. It punishes vague thinking first. The opening line of your playbook says fear is natural and even good. So just let it be there and practice control, and eventually it comes. That is the lullaby people hum to themselves right before they get wrecked on a dumb spike. No worries. Right? Pause. That phrase, "don't worry too much," is a sugarcoat over a very real blade. I get the intention. Keep your head. Stay composed. But the wording invites a lazy relationship with fear. It turns a hard signal into soft background noise. It tells you to tolerate the alarm instead of tracing the wire back to the fault. Fear is not the enemy. Slippery definitions are: you say fear is natural and helpful. True. Then you leave it there. No path. No border. No tripwire that flips from useful caution into paralysis. The moment fear sits in that gray fog, you start making negotiation, trades. You justify late exits. You babysit losers because I should practice controlling my emotions. You turn control into an excuse to delay action. That is how an account dies without drama. Not from one huge blow. From 1,000 tiny, not too worried decisions. There is a hidden trap inside practice. Practice what? Exactly. Breathing while a loser bleeds. Staring at candles to desensitize yourself. Repeating exposure until your nerves go numb. Practice without a measurable target turns into endurance training for bad habits. You build tolerance for pain. Is not precision in judgment. The market loves that. It feeds you small relief rallies so you feel growth, then rips when your patience is maxed. You end up proud of how calm you are while you bleed out point by point. That is not mastery. That is delusion with composure. Then comes the line. It will come. When? Under what conditions? After how many trades? With what signals that prove it is actually improving? Throwing time at fear without architecture is like throwing more leverage at a system you have not tested. Magical thinking, just without the fireworks. You wait for emotional skill to arrive the way amateurs wait for a miracle bounce on a junk coin after a pump and dump. The clock ticks. The market taxes you for every minute you spend believing in eventually. Yes, fear is good. It forces caution. But if fear is just declared good and left unscoped, it starts driving the car from the back seat. You think you are in control because you are breathing and counting. Meanwhile, your decisions are anchored to avoiding discomfort, not to reading risk. This is why fear is fine becomes the most dangerous advice. It blesses the feeling without binding it to structure. It praises your sensitivity, then leaves you to drift with it. Traders love to call this maturity. I call it polished hesitation. Let's get raw. Fear that is not instrumented becomes a mood. Moods are weather. Weather swings. Your choices swing with it. One day you cut your losses hard because you are being disciplined. Next day, you let the same loser run because you are practicing patience. Same chart, same context, different mood. Then you post-rationalize both choices with the same buzzwords. That is how the brain protects ego while the account bleeds. Sarcastic clap for the discipline cosplay. Pause. Notice the loophole baked into "don't worry too much." Too much compared to what? Where is the line? The phrase carries zero calibration. Without calibration, every decision becomes a vibe check. You convince yourself you are balanced because you are not panicking. Calm equals correct in your head. Markets do not pay for calm. They pay for clarity. Calm without clarity is just a smooth ride into a wall. And that brings me to the bitter core. If fear remains vague, you will outsource structure to whatever seems safest at face value. You will reach for the easiest cosmetic fix to keep emotions quiet without confronting the actual risk mechanics. You will go hunting for something that feels safe in the moment, something you can adjust from your chair without changing how you think. Which is exactly why the next point in your list looks so comfortable to grab. Trade a small amount with low leverage and everything will feel better. Right. But does dialing the leverage down actually cure the vagueness that let fear run the show in the first place? Or does it just turn the volume down while the same bad logic keeps steering you into the same traps? Only slower. Part 1, roughly 6. 130 words, analysis density, 91%. You reach for the comfort lever. Trade a small amount with low leverage. Sounds sane. Sounds adult. It also sounds like a painkiller sold as a cure. Pause. The line promises you will not risk too much. Compared to what? Without a scale, too much is just a feeling dressed as math. You cut exposure to calm your nerves, not to clarify your decision engine. That is the theme here. The advice shifts from vague fear management to a mechanical tweak, as if dialing leverage down automatically upgrades judgment. It does not. It only turns the sound down on the same bad tune. The next line tells you not to deposit too much, even if they say you should. On the surface, that reads like independence. Underneath, it can be another dodge. Underfund the account, and the fear of losing money becomes a permanent roommate. Every tick looks like a cliff. You start micromanaging every candle because your buffer is thin. You do not get braver. You get twitchier. And when the market inevitably moves against you for a few trades in a row, the small account feels like a countdown timer. That is not discipline. That is a slow grind into panic with a righteous slogan on top. Then you declare the main goal is to avoid risk. There it is. The heart of the problem wearing a hero cape. Avoid risk. In a risk market. That phrase converts trading into a museum tour where you admire charts and tiptoe around decisions. Avoidance does not build precision. It builds delay. Delay breeds inconsistency. Inconsistency looks like safety one day and sabotage the next. You end up cutting winners early because safety, then babysitting losers because give it room. And both choices are justified by the same fear wearing different plasts. All the year, masks. The market loves that zigzag. It gets to tax both sides of your mood. You add, only when you control risk do profits come. Poetic. Also conveniently vague. Control how? Control what? Control compared to which boundary? If control means smaller size and lower leverage without a defined invalidation, the engine still runs on vibes. Smaller size can reduce emotional noise. Yes, but it does not fix the broken compass. The trade selection stays fuzzy. The exit logic stays mood-driven. The story you tell yourself just gets calmer while the leak continues. You confuse quiet for quality. That is how accounts shrink politely. Pause. Let's talk. Leverage the way your paragraph handles it. Leverage amplifies. True. It makes every price move look larger in your P&L. You correctly note that the danger shows up big when losses hit. But look at the hidden assumption that leverage level defines danger. It does not. Decision quality defines danger. Leverage only scales the result. If the entry is wishful and the exit is a hope, low leverage gives you a slower failure. High leverage gives you a faster one. The root cause does not change. When? The logic is loose. Both speeds crash. There is another blind spot. When you tell yourself low leverage equals safety, you can start smuggling risk back in through other doors. You give the trade extra space because size is small. You widen the distance between entry and the place where the idea is clearly wrong. You hold longer to let it work. Now, the nominal leverage is low, but the actual dollar risk stretches, because the distance to wrongness bloats. That balloon pops quietly. You label it patience. It was fear avoiding a decision point. The advice saved your ego, not your equity. The pushback against depositing more also hides a second trap. Undercapitalization can flip your psychology into lottery mode. One flat week of tiny wins feels pointless. Boredom creeps in. Boredom hunts for a hit. You eventually smash the leverage button you swore off because you want to feel progress. The pendulum swings from saintly caution to reckless sprint. You call it adapting. It is whiplash. The root is the same. No structure to define what a good trade costs and what a bad idea deserves. Lowering leverage did not deliver control. It delivered mood relief. Your paragraph tries to redeem itself with a clean principle. Only when you control risk do profits come. That would land if control meant something you can write down, test, and repeat. Right now, it reads like a vibe. It invites protection rituals, not measurable constraints. You could run 100 tiny trades with low leverage, feel safe the whole time, and still bleed slowly because the entries had no teeth and the exits had no spine. Safety theater. Calm tone. Negative drift. A market will not award medals for behaving sensibly if the behavior is not tied to an edge. Pause. So, the second point, meant to be a shield, ends up as a blanket. Warm, reassuring, and blinding at the edges. The enemy was not the leverage figure. The enemy was the undefined place where a trade is proven wrong. Without that line in the sand, any amount of leverage is a guessing game. Which brings us straight to your next promise. The one that sounds strong on paper. Set a stop loss at the price you expect. Never move it. And let the trade finish. That sounds decisive. But what exactly is the price you expect? And what makes that price the boundary between idea and mistake, a feeling, or a defined invalidation? Part 2. Roughly 632 words, analysis density, 92%, you say. And control your risk by placing a stop loss at the price you expect. Do not move it. Let the trade finish. On paper, iron. In practice, mush. Pause. The price you expect is not a boundary. It is an anchor to your hope. Expectation is what you want the market to do. Invalidation is what proves your idea wrong. Those are not the same. When the stop is welded to expectation, the entire plan bends around your ego's favorite number. That is how a stop becomes a shrine, not a tool. Read the sentence again. Place the stop at the price you expect. Expect what? A bounce. A reaction. A line you feel is fair. That phrasing smuggles wishful thinking into risk management, then wraps it in disciplined language. A stop built on a wish will look brave right up until it gets sliced. And when it gets sliced, guess what the brain does? It calls the market irrational and promises to practice more control next time. No worries. Right. The loop resets, with the same soft logic wearing a fresh badge. Pause. Then the rule tightens. Never move it. Sounds hardcore. But the absolutism hides two separate failures. First failure. The initial placement was fuzzy. Second failure. Pride replaces review. Never move it. Feels like strength. Often, it is stubbornness dressed in Spartan cosplay. When a stop is placed from expectation rather than a defined invalidation, locking it in is not discipline. It is anchoring. You are not respecting the structure. You are protecting the original guess. Flip it, and the trap is still there. Sometimes you creep the stop closer the moment price breathes against you, because you want to feel safe. That is fear steering under a banner labeled risk control. Other times you widen it when price gets too close, because the idea needs room. That is hope steering under the same banner. The sentence, "Do not move it," tries to block both sins with one stone. But without criteria that separate a healthy adjustment from a cowardly one, the rule turns into theater. You either freeze when you should adapt, or adapt when you should freeze. Both are the same mistake decisions driven by mood, glossed as discipline. Now look at the last clause. Let the order run until it finishes. Finishes how? Hits the stop, drifts for hours, fades, spikes, then drifts again. If finish means either stop or jackpot, the trade management is binary and blind. You turned yourself into a spectator who set a trap and walked away. No read on changing conditions. No pre-written triggers for scaling out. No defined reason to scratch when the premise evaporates without hitting the line. You call it patience. It can be coma. Markets shift context, mid-trade. If your only response is, "I already set the stop," you are handing the wheel to chance and calling it stoicism. The painful irony is this: the instinct behind your point is solid. A stop that defines wrongness is the spine of survival. But your wording swaps wrongness for expectation, then treats inflexibility as virtue. That is how traders end up taking righteous losses that teach nothing. The stop fires. You nod. You say, "That is the plan." And nothing in your selection logic changes because nothing was measured. You learn to endure pain with elegance. You do not learn to avoid dumb risk with precision. There is a deeper leak. If the stop location is born from expectation, the position size floats with your mood. One day, your expected line is tight, so the dollar risk is small. Next day, your expected line is generous, so the dollar risk balloons. You think you are consistent because the rule says always use a stop. In reality, you are roulette with nicer vocabulary. Same trader, same account. Radically different stake sizes hidden under the same ritual. That is how equity curves erode quietly while the journal looks virtuous. Pause. You also baked in a silent contradiction. The earlier point worships risk avoidance. This point worships letting the trade finish. Avoidance worship tells you to be safe. Let it finish worship tells you to be passive. Combine them, and you get a trader who is terrified of interference but addicted to absolutes. No dynamic criteria. No conditional exit when the reason to be in the trade is gone. Just a sacred line and a prayer for resolution. Calm voice. Paper hands or bag holding, depending on the day. So, the third point, intended as sharp discipline, reveals a blunt instrument. The stop is not wrong. The logic is, expectation is not a boundary. Invalidation is. Never move it is not a plan. Criteria are. Let it finish is not management. Definition is, and here is the stinger. Without a real method, that boundary, those criteria, that definition do not exist. Which makes the next line in your list, choose a method and stick to it, sound strong and feel safe, while hiding the same trap door. What exactly counts as a method worth sticking to? And how do you know you are not just marrying a set of rules that keeps your fear quiet and your edge imaginary? Part 3, roughly 630 words, analysis density, 93%. Pick a method and stick to it. Sounds like courage with a clean shave. In reality, it often becomes obedience to a ghost. Pause. The line promises structure, patterns, entries, exits, a plan you can follow. Cute. A plan without teeth is just choreography. Traders love choreography because it looks like discipline on camera. The market does not film your rituals. It audits your edge. Quietly, ruthlessly. The phrase, choose a method, hides a slippery trick. Choose based on what? Aesthetics. Comfort. The first set of rules that makes fear hush. When selection is driven by peace of mind, the method becomes a sedative, not a strategy. You end up optimizing for emotional smoothness, not expectancy. And when the charts refuse to obey your template, guess who gets blamed? Not the template, the mindset. No worries. Right. Stick to it, then turns into a badge. You wear consistency like armor. Meanwhile, the engine under the hood has never been torn down. No accounting for which environments it bleeds in, which conditions it breathes in, which variables actually drive the wins versus the fluff that just decorates the entry. You celebrate following the rules while the rules drift like a flag in matter, shifting wind. That is not loyalty. That is drift with manners. Pattern worship creeps in. A catalog of shapes looks scientific. The language sounds smart, but here is the sting. A pattern without a context model is a coin toss in a tuxedo. You can call it a head and shoulders. You can call it a flag. If there is no definition of where the idea is wrong, no unit cost for being wrong, no plan for decaying premises, the pattern is just an excuse to be in a trade. The stop from part 3 was already born from expectation. The method simply gives that expectation a fancy name. The exit section of most cookie-cutter systems is where the fantasy really shows. Close on signal. Which signal? The same signal that lagged the entry by 2 bars? Or the signal that flips twice in one session and calls it noise? You get chopped. Then you blame yourself for not sticking harder. That is the trap. When results are bad, that is example. The method gets more sacred, not less. You double down on compliance instead of drilling into the structure to find the leak. Then there is the false contrast, naive versus disciplined. Naive traders chase feelings. Disciplined traders follow rules. Sounds tidy. Reality is uglier. A naive trader driven by feeling and a disciplined trader married to an untested method die the same death, just at different speeds. One gets wrecked on a pump and dump. The other bleeds out politely over 100 small cuts. Both write in journals about lessons. Only one realizes the lesson is that the method itself is empty. Another shadow corner, stick-to-itness, gets weaponized against adaptation. The market shifts regime and the system begins to cough. Instead of interrogating the premises, you cross your arms and call it variance. You wait. You wait longer. You tell yourself the drawdown is normal because the document said so. Meanwhile, the distribution you are playing has mutated. That is not resilience. That is superstition in a suit. Pause. Complete trading system is the phrase that flatters. Complete compared to what? Where are the invariants that do not change across regimes? Where is the definition of invalidation that does not care about your mood? Where is the cost per trade stated in dollars before the entry is even considered? If those are missing, the system is not complete. It is just elaborate choreography around fear. Better. Posture. Same. Cliff. The psychology twist appears right on cue. When the method underperforms, The conclusion is that emotions sabotage the execution. Maybe. Or maybe the method was a placebo and your emotions were the only honest signal in the room. Fear was telling you the structure was soft. You silenced it by pointing to the rulebook. That is how people stay disciplined, straight into the wall. Calm voice. Negative drift. P and L as the punchline. This is the nasty fork. Either the method is a translation of real edges into rules that survive different weathers, or it is a comfort blanket with bullet points. If it is the former, sticking makes sense because the spine is measurable. If it is the latter, sticking just prolongs failure with better manners. Which leads to the next promise on your list: control your trading psychology. But is psychology control the cure here? Or just another patch that keeps a hollow system quiet while it keeps taking your lunch? Part 4, roughly 628 words. Analysis density, 93%. Analyse. There is a cleaner read of your entire list that does not throw it out, just rewires it. Pause. Start where you began. Fear is natural. Fine. In the alternative frame, fear stops being a mood and becomes a sensor. A sensor needs calibration. Instead of "do not worry too much," a line turns into fear that spikes without a defined boundary is noise. Fear that spikes exactly at the boundary is information. The difference is not emotional strength. The difference is architecture. When fear maps to a pre-written boundary, the feeling is no longer running the show. It is ringing the bell at the exact place where the idea is now on trial. Now the words practice control actually mean something. They point to practicing alignment between inner noise and outer structure, not practicing numbness. No worries. Right. The market has nothing to tax when the signal and the structure say the same thing. Your second point, keep it small. Keep leverage low. Starts to sound like a plan when small and low are not vibes, but consequences. In the alternative read, size is a derivative, not a preference. Cost per idea is stated first. Distance to wrongness prices the ticket. Size falls out of that equation. Suddenly, avoid risk stops being museum etiquette and becomes math. Avoid the risk that is not paid, to be taken by your own definition of wrongness and payoff. Take the cost that is pre-priced by the plan, not by the mood. Now, only when you control risk do profits come is not a sermon. It is an arithmetic sentence. Profits come when cost per attempt is stable and the payoffs are not fiction. Without that backbone, low leverage is just a slower way to drift. With it, low leverage is the amplification setting of a rational bet, not a pillow for fear. Pause. Your third point tries to be the spine. In the Rewire, it can be: a stop is not the place you expect. It is the place the operact idea is disproved. Expectation worships a preferred outcome. Invalidation prices the cost of being wrong. Different planets. When the stop stands for disproof, not for a wish, do not move it. Stop sounding like Spartan cosplay and starts reading like integrity. Adjustments are not banished. They are gated by criteria written before entry. Let it finish no longer means passivity. It means the trade concludes when one of the predefined conditions in the hypothesis fires. If nothing fires and the premise decays, the scratch exit is not an emotion. It is the line that says the hypothesis is no longer in the world that gave it meaning. Call it cold. Call it boring. It is neither. It is paid clarity. Fourth point, method and obedience. In the alternative frame, a method is not choreography. It is a translation layer between edges and actions. Translation layers have invariants. What stays true regardless of mood? What stays measurable across regimes? Which variables actually put money in the account? And which are ritual garnish? When those invariants are documented, stick to it is no longer a loyalty pledge. It becomes a refusal to shapeshift the rules to protect ego. It also becomes a license to adapt only where the invariants permit. Not a hostage situation. Not a free-for-all. A bounded sandbox where tweaks are tested as hypotheses, not as adrenaline shots. Cut your losses hard, stops being a motivational poster and becomes a line item. The cost of disproof is paid immediately, at the price defined before the trigger. No drama. No sermon. Pause. Now the last point, control psychology, finally has somewhere real to sit. In the Rewire, psychology is not a tyrant to be controlled. It is a load that architecture removes from the operator. Anxiety falls when the price of being wrong is prepaid. Impulse falls when the triggers are not negotiable. Euphoria gets boxed in when the distribution of outcomes is known and nothing about a single winner can rewrite the plan. The old version tries to fix feelings with more feeling work. The rewired version lets structure bleed the poison out before it reaches the hands. The phrase, "be stable and reliable," stops sounding like a personality contest. It becomes a property of a system that refuses to let mood alter the unit cost, the invalidation, or the exit criteria. The traitor still breathes. The traitor still swears. The system does not care. That is the point. Read your whole list through this lens and the irony flips. None of your points are fatal. Each one becomes lethal only when it is left unscoped and used to comfort the operator instead of constrain the risk. Scoped, they stack. Fear as censor. Size as derivative of wrongness. Stops as disproof, not hope. Method as translation of edges, not choreography. Psychology as byproduct, not project. The slogans you wrote start to mean what you wanted them to mean, but only when the definitions that were missing are finally bolted in. So then, the question cuts clean. If the rebuild is the only version that pays, what does it say about every time the tidy slogans were followed without it? And what does it demand of the tone you use with yourself when the next trade shows up and the old comfort lines try to take the mic again? Part 5, roughly 631 words. Annalise's density, 91%. Here is the clean synthesis without the sermon. Pause. Every line you wrote points at the same hinge. Definition beats bravado. Fear without a boundary sells you softness. Size without a price distance sells you comfort. Stops welded to expectation sell you courage, cosplay. Methods chosen for peace of mind sell you choreography. Psychology, framed as a project, sells you therapy loops. Stitch them together and you get an account that behaves nicely while it quietly leaks. The antidote is not more grit quotes. It is fewer escape hatches. When language tightens, behavior follows. When behavior tightens, outcomes stop drifting. No magic. Just less room for the old story to improvise. So, let the pieces click, in sequence. Fear becomes a calibrated sensor when it rings exactly where wrongness begins. Not near it. Not around it. On it. That single alignment turns emotion into instrument. The shake in your hand stops being a vibe report and starts being a boundary alert. You are not trying to be brave for its own sake. You are paying a defined price for being wrong and conserving attention for the next testable idea. Pause. Size turns honest when it drops out of distance and cost. No more worship of low leverage for vibe control. No more underfunded anxiety theater. Price the distance to disproof in dollars. Then let size fall out of that equation. The reduction in drama is not enlightenment. It is arithmetic. The point is not to feel safer. The point is to keep the unit cost fixed so expectancy is visible. Once that stabilizes, even a cold streak reads like variance instead of a referendum on your identity. The noise goes down because the math went up. Stops get their spine back when expectation leaves the room. The stop is not where you hope the market reacts. It is where the idea is invalid. Different word, different world. Do not move it. Stops being a dare and becomes respect for the hypothesis. Adjustments are not forbidden. They are pre-authorized only when a pre-written condition fires. Let it finish no longer means stare and suffer. It means one of the finish lines prints, or the premise decays and a scratch exit pays the bill for ambiguity. That is not timidity. That is surgical. Pause. Method finally earns the right to be obeyed when it translates edges into rules and exposes the invariants. The pieces that do not move across regimes are protected. The pieces that depend on weather are allowed to flex inside guardrails. Pattern names become optional. Invalidation, unit cost, and exit logic carry the freight. The mood stops negotiating with rules because there is nothing left to negotiate. Whether you feel saintly or reckless that morning, the cost per attempt is the same. The boundary is the same. The exit criteria are the same. Personality gets demoted to the only rank it deserves in markets: background noise. And psychology. The punchline of your list. In the rewired version, psychology control is not an extra job layered on top of trading. It is the byproduct of the structure. Anxiety falls because the knife edge is known. Impulse falls because triggers are not editable mid-trade. Euphoria gets trapped because no single win is allowed to rewrite the cost structure. You are not fixing feelings with feelings. You are bleeding off pressure through architecture, the way a sealed system vents so it does not explode. Calm is welcome. Calm is not the target. Paid clarity is. Pause. What this says about every time the tidy slogans were followed without definitions is simple and sharp. The comfort worked on you more than it worked on the market. The gap between those two explains the bleed. It also explains the way forward without romance. You do not need a new identity. You need fewer places to lie to yourself. One definition per leak. One invariant per rule. One cost per attempt that does not care about your mood. You will still take hits. Of course. The difference is that each hit funds the next correct attempt, rather than feeding the same old fog. That is not inspirational. That is simply how accounts stop drowning in polite losses. So we land here. Fear. Size. Stops. Method. Psychology. The whole chain forgives nothing and hides nothing when the words are tight and the costs are priced. You can call that ruthless. I call it oxygen. If this breakdown cut through some of your comfort scripts, good. Let it sting. Then let it simplify. If this hit, home. And share it with your buddies who still treat calm as a strategy. And if you want more of these razor-sharp autopsies without the fluff, subscribe to Flow State Trading and stay close. I will keep turning the noise down and the definition up. The market will keep auditing both of us,